From The Times and The Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Luke Jones.
There was a social worker who was working for Hampshire County Council, but he was also working for Southend, where he was also a social worker. And he was on a Teams call to Hampshire. While he was on that call, hadn't realised that his microphone was not muted and answered the phone saying, "Oh, hello, welcome to Southend Children's Services," which raised a few eyebrows among his colleagues, and he was dismissed from both jobs. Social worker is a pretty important job, and it just kind of made you think, what's going on here?
What seems to be going on is some people are complementing their full-time job secretly with another, sometimes multiple extra jobs. The overemployed, the internet calls it.
I don't think I can ever top my last month's income.
I brought in $17,187.
I made $6,400 from my job, $3,040 from my second full-time job.
So if you're young and you want to potentially make double your income this year, listen up.
All over the world, after the pandemic especially, where people working remotely juggle 2 or more roles in different companies.
This is an overemployed woman making $404,000 a year, and she gave me access to her entire budget. After taxes and deductions, she's bringing home $10,516 every paycheck, and she's paid twice a month.
How did this start? And how are people getting away with it for so long?
They talk about having to finesse your employer, which I guess means making sure that there's no clashes and that you appear to be a diligent worker.
The story today, polygamous working.
My name is Ben Ellery, and I am the crime editor at The Times.
Ben, I hadn't realised this is called polygamous working. That's the phrase. When we use that term, what actually are we talking about?
So, polygamous working basically means having more than one full-time job. So it could be 2 jobs, but I've seen examples where people are boasting about having 5 or 6. And this kind of thing has happened before, but perhaps back in the day, people would call it moonlighting, where you'd work one job during the day and then in the evening you might, run a taxi. But this is different. This is 2 full-time jobs, 40 hours a week or what have you.
That you're meant to be doing at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. That you're meant to be doing at the same time, and the hours that you've been contracted for are 9 to 5 for both jobs.
I am in IT. I have 5 full-time jobs, 4 of which are at Fortune 500 companies. If I manage all 5 for a year, I will make around $1.2 million in 2022.
Since the pandemic, I can say that all of the contractors in my network, probably about 8 out of 10 of them are juggling multiple contracts because they are working from home.
I'm a software engineer. And you have more than one job? Yes, I'm overemployed at 2 companies. 2 full-time jobs. Correct. How much do you make at both and then combined? At one, it's $125, and at another, it's $112 base. So over $200K easy. Yeah, definitely over $200K easy.
Since time immemorial, we've had people doing side hustles or evening jobs or weekend jobs. But this exact practice, do we file that in the folder of blame the pandemic?
I mean, the pandemic has definitely been the fuel for this. It basically means that you're able to not be seen by your boss. So while you're not seen by your boss, then what are you able to get up to? And there have been examples where people are on 2 different Zoom calls and have switched the camera off.
Which you wouldn't be able to do if the 2 jobs you were trying to do at the same time were receptionist or firefighter, where you sort of physically had to be somewhere and would be seen at all times. It's about the anonymity that you can create.
Yes, exactly.
Online.
Yeah, and a lot of these people, when they're discussing online, which jobs are the best in order to do polygamous working or being overemployed is another expression they use. But there's a lot of discussion about...
I feel overemployed.
Well, there's a lot of discussion about which jobs lend themselves well to, this kind of working. One of the ones that seems to be really popular are jobs in technology and coding. And I think coders maybe keep slightly odd hours anyway. So, they don't necessarily have to be doing like a 9 to 5 or what have you. A lot of them will kind of work through the night and, pull 13-hour days or what have you. And also those are very well paid as well. So if you can do 2 of those, then more the better.
Is there also a sense that this might be a bit of cheeky overlapping? I'm leaving this one job, I've got this new one, but actually if there's a few months overlap, great.
I've certainly seen that mentioned online, and I've also seen people recommending other people to do this for a couple of years in order to save up for a house or a wedding or something along those lines. So it's almost seen as like, well, I'll do it for as long as I can, get away with it.
If you ask me how I feel about overemployment, I would say it was great. It was nice to have 2 paychecks and more disposable income to do whatever the hell I wanted. But if you ask me on a deeper level, I would say that shit was hard.
But actually, it's very stressful. You hear people talking about having to balance their diary and, how do I book my holiday when I've got this much holiday to take, and I've booked this holiday, but my second job wants me to work on those days, and maybe I'll have to take my laptop with me on holiday in order to appear like I'm working. Then there's like software you can download. So there's a thing called a mouse jiggler.
Beg your pardon.
Right. So a mouse jiggler is basically a bit of software which keeps your mouse moving when you're not at your computer.
Because some workplaces, if they're not sensing things happening on your laptop, it says that you're inactive. But this sort of pretends like you're still active on your computer.
Yeah, exactly. If, it'll stop your computer shutting down. And if you're on Teams or Slack, it will say, Ben Ellery active because, his mouse is moving about.
But actually he's off filing copy for The Guardian.
Yeah. So it's very, very stressful. And the discussion online is all about these are the tips, these are the tricks in order to pull the wool over your employer's eyes, and what can you do in order to appear to be a diligent member of the team.
You've already mentioned that the mouse business to keep you looking active online and they're having a camera off on a meeting, but any other tips that I'm fishing for them?
So one of the things apparently to do in a meeting, if you know that you're going to have to be in 2 meetings at once and perhaps you've got to switch your camera off or what have you, is to prepare, have a few things ready to say them early so that your voice is heard.
Ooh.
You've contributed, and then you can go silent. You can then complete some work on your other job while still seemingly giving this meeting your full attendance. So, someone might try and avoid a promotion because if they've got more responsibility, then that might mean that they have more interaction with their manager, or they might need to be more present in the office. So, they might try and fend off those kinds of requirements that their boss is asking.
How common is this?
Well, I think the experts I've spoken to have said that it's underreported, so it's very difficult to get a handle on it. But the National Fraud Initiative was set up following, a spike in this by the Cabinet Office, and it was a pilot set up to use data, employees' data, to try and match people who had been in 2 jobs. So they might take your national insurance number and cross-reference it across London councils to see if it's in use somewhere else. And they ran that pilot just for, I think it was 2 or 3 months. And they found 23 instances within the London borough councils, which added up to around £500,000, just shy of £500,000 for the public purse. And that's just, cost to the taxpayer, those kind of double salaries that are being paid out.
Why do people do it, do we think? I mean, is it just about cash?
Yeah, I think it is about cash. People who you speak to who do it might argue that, there's a cost of living crisis. And I've seen one phrase saying, in today's world, 2 jobs is equal to 1 job.
Because salaries haven't kept pace with the
inflation.
cost of living.
Yeah, exactly. But having said that, I've seen lots of people boasting about earning 400 grand a year. So I don't think it's completely down to the cost of living crisis.
No.
I just think that there's the opportunity there and people are willing to grab it.
I had 2 jobs going on for a while, and they were 2 full-time 9-to-5 jobs. I was making almost 200,000, maybe even a little over that actually. And I was able to just really do nice things and really take care of myself, go to nice places, buy nice things, save up for property.
And for some people, it is a sort of like a counterculture thing where you're kind of sticking it to the man. It's about a sort of rebellious, let's get away with this, it'll be a laugh kind of thing. And you do see people online congratulating others, giving them a virtual slap on the back. Good for you, mate. You can now hire that personal trainer. I saw a post where someone was paying a nanny, a personal trainer, an assistant, and a chef because they were never leaving their house. They had so many jobs that they were just kind of rooted to their computer and weren't able to do anything for themselves, but they were able to kind of outsource that work as well. So yeah, I've spent a lot of time in these online spaces where they are talking about what to do, how to do it, the best ways to do it. But actually, what I've found is that what they're doing may be illegal.
How exactly? Coming up in a moment. Ben, we're talking about polygamous working. We're face-to-face in the studio, so I know you're actually not also at the same time pretending to be a social worker in Hampshire County Council or what have you. You've had quite an insight into this because you've already mentioned these online spaces where people discuss this idea of polygamous working and swap tips. What kind of, not to sound like a grandpa, what kind of online spaces? Where on the internet, Ben?
Right. So, well, as is often the case with a lot of these things, Reddit has a lot to answer for, and that's a space online people go.
Big message boards, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. And the Overemployed subreddit has over 400,000 members. It's a real wormhole. You could get stuck in there for days, kind of going through people, their questions, their advice, the types of characters in there. There was one last week. The post was just titled, "Should I Risk It?" And it was someone referring to J1 and J2. So these are the terms that they use, job 1, job 2. And the guy was basically saying, I've got an old colleague at J1 who's about to start J2, and I'm really worried he's going to blow the whistle on me. What shall I do?
Oh.
And people were advising, why don't you take him aside? Just say, look, guy, don't ruin. I'm onto a good thing here. So there's kind of support networks for people. A lot of the time, people struggle with guilt, so they'll go on there to kind of make themselves feel better about themselves. And people say, no, you're doing the right thing. Don't worry about it. Keep going.
Also, though, just having a look on that subreddit here, there's someone bragging about it, talking about their J2, their second job. No daily stand-up, that's sort of corporate code for meeting, isn't it? So no daily meeting, just a once-a-week 30-minute check-in, no Jira board, whatever that is, or anyone really managing tickets. So sort of actually bragging about how easy it is because there's so little actual human contact in the job.
Yeah, well, that's right. There was a guy on there who said he was making $1.2 million a year from, I think it was 5 jobs. There's also people, a lot of people listening to this might complain that they have a lot of meetings at their employer.
Oh, yeah.
There was one guy saying, look, how do you deal with all the meetings? And one of the replies was, it's nearly noon and I've had 9 meetings today.
Because I've had to be on, in some cases, 2 at the same time with the camera off.
Yeah, so also TikTok is a huge space for this. So if you go on there and have a dig around, you can find people who, some of them work in recruitment actually, or are recruiters themselves, and they advise people on how to juggle 8-9 jobs And, they're quite open and honest about it and sort of say, this can be stressful.
So here's the thing, at any given time, one of your jobs is probably going to suffer. And for me, it was my second job when I first started out because I just couldn't hack it. Like I just couldn't keep up with all the demands and the training and just really get into it. The other thing they don't tell you is that it doesn't matter how good you are at managing your schedule. It felt very much like cheating. I'll never forget when I was on one call with one employer and the other employer started calling me like out of the blue repetitively. No.
There are people who go on there who talk about how they did it, how much money they make, and they talk about, again, sort of how stressful it is, but I was able to save up for this, or I was able to save up for that. So, it's it's a big thing on TikTok as well.
If you're in your 20s and 30s, the opportunity to make life-changing wealth over the next few months is very real. I'm diversifying my income streams. I got laid off last year and it had never been clear to me how you cannot rely on one employer.
I think what's interesting now is we've seen the boom in AI, and AI is now being used by people to complete second, third jobs. So one of the big questions that people are asking on Reddit is, I feel guilty I'm using AI to complete my work. And other people are just like, oh, shut up. AI is a tool, isn't it, really? So people are using that in order to complete tasks. There's also a lot of examples where people are actually paying other people to do the jobs for them. So what they'll do is they'll go online and they're finding people in other countries where they are less paid and getting them to do the work for them. And they'll pay them, really, really small amounts, a fraction of what they're earning, and getting them to do the jobs for them. Sometimes, they'll check the work to make sure it's okay. Sometimes they don't. And I've seen stories where they've been caught out because, the work has been really poor and they've kind of submitted it themselves thinking, oh, yeah, this is fine. So, yeah, that's another thing that's going on.
Incredible. For the concerned employer listening, how do you spot this? What are the red flags from some of your employees that you might need to watch out for?
Yeah, well, so councils up and down the country now are taking this really seriously, and actually one, Croydon, has issued a helpful list for managers of red flags. So if you find that your employee is difficult to get hold of, if they're not responding to emails quickly or even at all, that could be a red flag. If they do not want to be promoted, that's a telltale sign, because then they might be expected to have more responsibility, and that is exactly not what they want to do. And that kind of ties into another of the red flags, which was any avoidance of scrutiny. So if you've got a meeting booked in for an appraisal or something like that, where you're going to go over what have you been doing in your time, then, be mindful that of employees who strangely do not want to be doing that. And I think there's also been other advice about employees who seem to have a suspicious number of relatives going sick or something, something like that,
And aside from these people clearly sounding like actually quite bad employees because they're stretched across 2 or maybe more jobs, what is the problem here, Ben?
So I suppose there's a couple of things, one of which is that, these people who are working for public bodies, companies or organizations, when they talk about fraud, they talk about the inside threat. So that might be staff stealing from the till. They actually refer to this as sort of stealing time. And if you're being employed for, 40 hours and you're only working 50% of that, and this is taxpayers' money, then that money could be spent on things in your community, or funding really important services for people who desperately need it, and you're taking that money away, essentially. So that's one of the issues in the public sector. There's also, working from home, this gives working from home a bad name as well. So, it's given huge benefits to people, and I'm sure lots of people would argue that one of the only good things to come out of the pandemic is how it kind of changed our work culture. But if bosses are having to worry about what their employees are up to all the time, then it kind of affects everybody.
You used the F word there. It is this fraud.
So working 2 jobs is not illegal. Your employer, will not be happy if you do not declare it. However, when you start your job, you sign a contract, there's more than likely going to be a clause in there where it says this is your one and only employment. So if you sign that contract, that could be an offence, and that could be fraud, which is a extremely serious offence. And last week was the first case we know of someone going to court charged with fraud over working for 3 different government departments. I think it was 9 roles over a space of 3 years. And he's been charged. It was his first appearance. He denies the charges, but, we are now seeing that this is moving on to the police getting involved. And because it's such a new and emerging practice brought on by the pandemic, I think we're now going to see employers and the police really trying to get a hold of it and get on top of it.
And is this something that the police can get on top of? Because there are so many, even just within fraud, there are so many different types of fraud that are emerging.
Yeah.
Do they have the bandwidth themselves to actually get on top of this?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and the police are completely overwhelmed, and especially online fraud. I mean, it's responsible for a huge proportion of all crime. Sometimes people estimate between 30 and 50% of all crime is online fraud nowadays. So, yes, but if you were caught falsifying your hours on some kind of paperwork in order to show that you were working different times, then that could be used against you as a criminal offence. As I say, if you've signed this contract, then that could be quite open and shut.
Are there tax issues as well? I mean, would HMRC give a damn about this?
Well, yeah, I guess, if it's PAYE and they've got your national insurance number, then that will all get handled automatically, but then, it could push you into different tax brackets, I suppose. But I imagine they're kind of handled in the same way that a freelancer, might handle having... A freelancer, should say, they're quite open about what they're doing and taking on lots of different jobs. And we might sort of point to politicians having, God knows how many jobs. But again, there are strict rules on what jobs they can do, and they must declare them. And we've certainly written enough about politicians who haven't declared them and, have got in trouble as a result. So, yeah, it is different to that. I'm sure that there are HMRC issues. I'm sure HMRC will be looking at this issue given the state of the public finances.
Is there a bit of a grey zone here that we're talking about? On the one hand, there might be people who are just being incredibly entrepreneurial. I use that term lightly. And then there is obviously a potentially criminal aspect to this. But for the most part, I don't know, when you talk to people about this, it doesn't immediately jump out at you as being a particularly awful crime, if it is that.
Well, I think, yeah, like I say, I've spoken to people who paint the real picture of the cost of it. And when our local services are, getting stripped to the bone, it does have a real world effect. And, it's something which I think people might be quite blasé about. Certainly, friends I've spoken to have sort of said, good on him, like, well done. But it kind of it has a knock-on effect for all of us, really. And I don't think anyone would have an issue if you said, look, I've got this side job, you tell your employer, this is what I do, what have you, then work it out, then fair enough, crack on.
Could you do it, do you think? Either in terms of your current job, or do you even have the disposition to do it? I know I don't have the concentration for it.
I don't think I can handle the stress of it. I've got enough. I've got enough of that at the moment. I mean, I can barely juggle things as they are. I don't think adding to that would be conducive to my personal mental health or my professional job. Yeah. So no, I don't think it's going to be one for me.
Ben Ellery, crime editor at The Times. If you want to read his story on polygamous workers or any of his other reporting, you can find it at thetimes.com if you've got a subscription. If you've got a friend who might find this interesting, maybe they've only got one full-time job and they have the time to listen, why not WhatsApp them or email them a link to the episode? Today's producer was Shabnam Grewal. The executive producer was Fiona Leach. Sound design was by Tom Birchall. And theme composition was by Mauro Seto. I'm Luke Jones. See you soon.